Crested geckos, gargoyle geckos, leachianus geckos, and more have risen in popularity over the last decade, and for good reason. They make such good pets. But when you are new to keeping any animal or doing anything for the first time, mistakes are bound to happen. And sometimes you can be making mistakes without even realizing it. So here are 10 mistakes that New Caledonian gecko owners make. Number 1 is probably what I see most often, and that is overhandling. I get a lot of comments and a lot of DMs saying, I'm handling my gecko 4 or 5 times a week, but they're not taming down, they're getting more scared of me, what do I do? And the first thing I tell them is handling your gecko 4 or 5 times a week is far too much. I sometimes only handle my geckos once every 2 weeks, let alone multiple times a week. You have to remember that reptiles are not domesticated pets and that they are commonly anthropomorphized online and given personalities or emotions or feelings that they don't actually have. Majority of the time you will have a happier and healthier gecko if you just leave them alone. I'm not saying don't handle your gecko at all, because socializing with your animal is super important, especially if down the line they need to go to the vet. If they're used to handling, then the vet visit will be less stressful for them. But if you are planning on, or you already have your gecko, don't expect to be handling them every single day. Reptiles aren't really that type of pet. Number 2. When you first bring them home, a huge mistake that I see is people not quarantining their reptiles. You should be quarantining even if this is your first or only reptile. Quarantining is more than just preventing infection from spreading to other animals, but recognizing the infection in the first place. Because the sooner you catch that illness that they may have, the better. If it's left too long, it could be too late. And issues are harder to spot when the animal is in their proper setup and on proper substrate. I have a full video about quarantine that explains why we do this, how to do this, and how long it lasts, etc. Number 3. Speaking of substrate, I think a big mistake that I see people making is keeping babies on substrate. Now, this isn't a detrimental mistake. If you have your baby crested gecko on loose substrate already and they're doing fine, they're pooping okay, then that is fine. But my recommendation is keeping them on paper towel until they are about 10 grams. Hatchling or baby geckos are just so teeny tiny. And although I know topsoil, play sand, and a cocoa fiber mix is completely safe for them to digest, I would rather not worry about anything going wrong there and keep all of my tiny geckos on paper towel. Number 4 is not feeding them bugs. I completely understand if your gecko will just refuse bugs, like point blank, they don't want them, but try lots of different bugs. Try waxworms, just don't feed them too often. Try locusts, try dubia roaches. Try a bunch of different bugs, because what I find is if you have your crested gecko eating bugs, they grow so much faster. They build muscle quicker, they stay leaner, and they just get generally bigger faster if they are eating bugs. Sometimes it can be things like the tongs that scare them, so you can try just dropping the bugs into the enclosure in a dish and just letting them hunt for themselves. Or if you really want to get them eating, you can actually cover the bug in their formula mix and they will generally take it that way. Number 5. People talk about how New Caledonian geckos need high humidity. And this is true. I'm not saying this isn't true, but humidity can actually be too high. If your enclosure is constantly sat at 80-90% humidity and it's soaking wet all of the time, this is the perfect way to give your new gecko a respiratory infection or a bacterial infection. It's important that your enclosure dries out in the middle of the day and gets down to about 60%. I like to mist in the morning and the evening, and that way they still have the opportunity to drink from the water droplets. The humidity gets higher to help with shedding and just general health, but it also drops back down again and it dries out a bit. Number 6. If your humidity tweaking method is using a misting system, that is okay, but you have to remember that these teeny tiny pipes can harbor bacteria over time, so you should be deep cleaning your misting systems at least every couple of months. Or even better, replace the piping, because too high of humidity combined with a dirty misting system, again, is a recipe for disaster. Number 7. Everyone knows that New Caledonian geckos are nocturnal geckos, but that doesn't mean you should keep them in darkness 24/7. Reptiles, like all animals, need a circadian rhythm. If your animal is nocturnal, they need to know that it's nighttime. They shouldn't just be awake all the time because it's constantly dark. And sometimes just a window in a reptile room is not going to be enough for them, especially if your enclosure has blacked out sides and a blacked out back. So providing them with a 12-hour on, 12-hour off light cycle is the perfect way to have a happy, healthy gecko. And for me personally, I love to provide my animals with UVB. My geckos love to bask under their UVB, and you will notice a difference in coloration if you do provide it for them. And even though they'll be hidden away, you will notice that they'll choose spots that are a little bit closer to the UVB just to keep their bones nice and healthy. Metabolic bone disease can happen in any reptiles, geckos, snakes, lizards, whatever it might be. So feeding bugs dusted with calcium and providing a UVB unit is the way to go to prevent things like MBD. Number 8, let's talk a bit about heating. So a lot of people do say that you don't need any heat sources for your geckos, but I tend to disagree with this. I think it's a blanket statement that can be a little bit harmful and setting people up for failure, because if you come from a colder climate like the UK, keeping a gecko without a heat source during winter isn't going to be what's best for them. And on top of that, if you're feeding bugs and using a heat mat, your gecko might not be able to properly digest their food. So the best heat source to go for if you are from a colder climate is either an incandescent bulb or a basking bulb. I don't like deep heat projectors for geckos specifically. I think they are just far too strong and their output is a little bit weird. I'm going to do a whole deep dive on heating eventually, but your best bulb options are, like I said, incandescent bulbs or halogen bulbs. And just like your UVB and your LEDs, have it on for 12 hours and off for 12 hours. Number 9, when people send me photos of their enclosures, one thing that I always nitpick about is clutter. Crested geckos specifically come from dense forests, and gargoyle geckos come from shrublands. Your enclosure should pretty much be 70% full of just stuff, okay? That can be live plants, it can be cork bark, cork tubes, it can be branches. People like to provide the little coconut hides as well. Fill your enclosure with stuff and you will have a much less stressed out gecko. If your gecko feels nice and comfortable in their enclosure, they tend to be a lot easier to handle. They don't feel stressed out and scared all the time, and they also eat a whole lot better. And the last mistake that I see is assuming that all New Caledonian geckos have the same care requirements. New Caledonia consists of lots of small islands, and each of these islands can have completely different plant types, completely different temperatures, humidity. And a good example of this is gargoyle geckos tend to like it a little bit warmer than the other New Caledonian geckos. Leachianus geckos are more likely to bask under UVB because they hang out at the top of the treetops. Even though they come from the same place, each species has their own care requirements. So don't treat all New Caledonian geckos the same way, and make sure you really look into their habitat in the wild to try and nail their husbandry as best as possible. So that is everything for today, guys. Let me know what your New Caledonian gecko is called down below. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and please like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. I'll see you all next time. Bye bye.